Let me just do one other thing. I'll just lift this. I'm going to lift this up a little bit.
Oh, hold on. Let me pin your. Okay, now you can show it, and you're all we see. So.
And as long as we're talking what we're going to talk, I'll do this as well.
And you got your books in the background. That's good. Oh, yes. There we go. Placement, man.
Is it too glary on there?
You might. No, it's okay now. FDR democracy.
Howdy.
All these,
howdy, everybody.
There's all this set of volumes here. This is all FDR's public papers and addresses that line the shelf here.
Right.
Howdy, everybody.
How's it going?
Well, I got in.
Good. So, well, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay. I looked at those two videos you wanted me to peek at, so I did that.
Oh, you did? Good. All right. I'm Bruce McGee, and Stephen.
I'm Steve Payne. Steve Payne.
And we are here today with Harvey Kaye. Welcome back. We started our interview last week and decided to finish it up today. And you show us your book. Tell us about your book in the background there.
The first thing is there's this one, Fight for the Four Freedoms. What made FDR and the Greatest Generation truly great.
Right.
And this one actually, it's a look at the really dynamic relationship between FDR and the generation that he shaped by way of his politics and his programs, and the struggles that they both, as people and president, engaged in against the powers that be in America, the corporate powers that be in particular, and then went on to fight fascism in World War II. And it's framed essentially by FDR's 1941 speech, what we would call the State of the Union speech of January 41, in which he basically warns Americans that look, the fascists are going to come for us, and the war in Europe is going to come directly to our shores, and we really do need to support Britain,
right,
in the face of the Nazi onslaught, and also that we have to become the arsenal of democracy.
Yes.
Okay? But last but not least is he then says that we will not give up the achievements that we've pursued these past 8 years. The first 8 years of his presidency, the New Deal. And moreover, we will look forward to a world characterized by 4 essential human freedoms.
Well, and what else?
Speech. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to list them. Go ahead.
Right. Freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. I don't know if we'll return to that, but I'll just point out that the first two, freedom of speech and freedom of worship, are obviously built right into our Constitution in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Okay, and then freedom from want and freedom from fear were expressions of American aspirations, probably ever since the founding, and he was trying to project them in not only in American terms, but also as a vision for a world beyond the war.
Well, and that's a really important redefining of the word freedom, which from our libertarian friends is pretty much totally negative. Just don't stop me from polluting the water. Just don't stop me from starving to death. Just don't stop me from dying from a disease.
It's what you and I studied in seminary. It's antinomianism. It's lawlessness.
Yeah.
They want the freedom without the responsibility, but it's classic lawlessness.
And so talk a little bit about how this is a positive freedom of, like everybody deserves health care. Why did it take us this long to figure
well,
out?
I can put it in FDR terms, and I'll just note, just since we began there, then this past year I brought out this one, FDR on democracy. So my thinking was that there are some editions of FDR's writings, but they're generally, they're the ones that everyone knows, the inaugural address, or I should say his speech accepting the nomination, his inaugural address, and ensuing inaugural addresses. And I wanted to, and not needless to say as well, the speech at Pearl Harbor, the day after Pearl Harbor was attacked. I mean, there are collections, but I wanted a collection of his speeches that range from his very earliest days as a political figure all the way through to his closing days that specifically addressed democracy.
Right.
And so I went through all of, since people will see this, I went through all of his writings.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, yeah. Oops.
Oh my gosh.
Which I had
Does
done
that include
before,
all
but
the
I went through.
Does that include all the fireside chats and the little talks?
It's got everything, even the things that he signed regarding executive orders, got it all in there. So I went through that and I chose the most critical, most significant speeches regarding American democratic life and the very ideals of democracy. And then I edited those so that they would fit into a book of, I don't know, what is it, like 180, 200 pages.
Right.
Because I wanted people to appreciate, number one, not only that his commitments to rescuing democracy in the New Deal with a generation, but also his determination to defend that democracy in the course of World War II. But beyond that, he actually was far more radical. I mean, he was like any political figure, he made some terrible and tragic mistakes, which we can turn to later. But the fact is that he was really committed, not just to sustaining or defending democracy. He was really committed to enhancing democracy, even if it meant redistributing power and wealth in America.
Or maybe
even if it meant, what's that?
Maybe especially if it meant.
Especially, indeed, especially. He also wanted to enhance, so this is to respond to your question in part, he really did want to redefine, in some ways, the fundamental American social contract. If we see that in the Declaration of Independence, say, he really wanted to, if you like, return to the meaning of the Declaration, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but he wanted to do it in 20th century terms, because he believed that far too often in the course of the 19th century into the 20th, that Americans had basically sacrificed those ideals in favor of allowing the rich and the powerful to pursue economic growth and development from above. So, I mean, this is fundamental. In fact, again, later, I want to point out that from start to finish, his presidency is built around that idea of transforming the idea of American freedom to go by way of going back to the Declaration and the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and literally reshaping them for the 20th century. Now,
in the preamble of the Constitution, promote the general welfare. When have we done that?
The preamble, exactly. You got it. And so I'll just say that.
So he's got a dynamic view of the Constitution and the Declaration, not a static view.
Right, exactly. So he definitely was subscribing to the founders, you might say, but not limiting the American imagination to the late 18th century.
Right. Okay.
And so what does this mean to him, freedom? Well, there were three speeches that obviously I include in here, which may or may not be his most important speeches in every case, but they're very telling speeches. And in each one, it comes down to this idea that fundamentally America is meant to be about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that freedom, you cannot be free if you are without.
Right.
That is, as he puts it in a few of his, quite regularly in fact, but the famous speech of 1944, the Economic Bill of Rights speech, which he then introduces what he thinks would be a new second Bill of Rights, an Economic Bill of Rights. And he says, necessitous men, he's quoting one of the Supreme Court justices of the past, I can't remember exactly. Necessitous men are not free men. Needy people are not free people.
Right.
So that I think is fundamental to his thinking all the way back to 1912, where he's really first entering politics.
Well, and it's in contrast to my favorite song, Me and Bobby McGee, being a son of Bob McGee. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, and that was not his vision of freedom. That's the vision of a lot of people in our society. So,
yeah, well, I mean, it's the case that up until the 1930s, we have to remember, there was no such thing as unemployment insurance. There was no such thing as Social Security. There was no such thing as the rights of workers to organize unions and bargain collectively. There was no, if you like, minimum wage at the federal level, and ours is completely out of touch with reality today. But nevertheless, there was no minimum wage. Basically speaking, it was a 19th century Gilded Age kind of economy. It was a Gilded Age economy in which the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. And sadly, we've been living through a second Gilded Age in which the rich have gotten grossly richer and working people have in fact barely kept pace with it, with things.
Yeah, to tie it into our General Bailiwick of Louisiana, I'm working through a book right now, Strangers in Their Own Land, about the Louisiana Purchase. And, you know, the Jefferson government was concerned in setting up a territorial government in New Orleans. How are we going to get a buy-in from, basically, would you call them the petty bourgeois? They were the people that owned, land or businesses. Anybody without property or slaves, there was no concern at all about getting buy-in from them. It was just, how do we get these, the people.
They're not petty bourgeois. The petty bourgeois would be small shopkeepers.
So
and
these
others.
are bourgeois.
Bourgeois,
Okay.
which is a good term. Which is a very good term as you're speaking from Louisiana. A good
Right.
French word, you might say.
They knew they were bourgeois.
By the way, when my wife was working at LSU, I will remind everyone, I did my PhD at LSU in the early 1970s. One of her first jobs was in student housing at LSU, and the woman who ran student housing her name was Miss Bourgeois, which was a great.
Oh, gosh. What your winter class should all be named because buy up.
Yeah, so you're talking about New Orleans or Louisiana Purchase. Sorry.
Yes, well, that was it. That the government was trying to figure out how to get buy-in from the landed, aristocracy.
Yeah, right.
People with land, with slaves, or the people with businesses in town. They weren't worried about how do we get the poor folks on our side. They'll just come along. It's the job of the upper class to keep the lower classes in line. And they've done a pretty good job of it most of the time. Very rarely do we have a progressive moment. But things lined up for FDR, I suppose. And he had people on his left pushing him harder that he could go to. He was seen by some as a class traitor, but he could sit down with the Rockefellers and say, look, a couple of decades ago, they took folks like you in Russia and lined them up against the wall and they shot them. And then they confiscated their property and nationalized their businesses. Is that what you want, or do you want to pay a little tax? And, they're like, I'm thinking.
Well, hold on. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about this.
Tell us.
First isn't so much a story, but it's important to realize that FDR was primed not only in the sense of ready when he ran for president, not only to address the Great Depression, the crash and the Great Depression. He really knew that in order to redeem the United States from the Depression, that there were certain kinds of things that were fundamental.
Right.
And one of them was you had to enhance the American workers and farmers' purchasing power. Okay.
Right.
And to do that, it wasn't simply a matter of passing a few laws. You had to empower people so that they could actually themselves fight for their incomes and their rights.
Right.
And this is by the way, so it's like he had to engage American laborers in fighting the Great Depression, but he also had to empower Americans to fight for themselves and in part to push him, as you were saying. And, and I'm going to get to Huey Long, which I know you want to talk about. Okay. One of the things that, and in fact, the idea of pushing is important here because so FDR's first 2 years, well, the first 100 days of the Roosevelt presidency, and we're now in the first 100 days of a Biden presidency, which by the way, is already within the last week turning into a disappointing first 100 days. Because number one, I understand today it was made clear they were not going to include the $15 minimum wage that was one. And the other one, I'm blanking on the other one, the $2,000 checks for the, up front. I mean,
did you hear 2,000? Well, 1,400.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, they won. It's arguable that they won Georgia because they promised 2,000.
Exactly.
Regardless of the 600,
Right.
So that's disappointing. But let's go back to Roosevelt. Sorry. So, but this has been on my mind. in Roosevelt's
We
case,
do want to
he
compare
did-
Roosevelt's 100 days with Biden's, because how is Biden doing? Well, compared to Trump, great, but you know, there are other presidents, and that's why it's important to remember, well, what did FDR do?
yeah, there's no 100 days like FDR's 100 days. Okay. Similarly, there were no 100 days like Lincoln's 100 days, considering the fact that, well, you live in Louisiana, considering the secession of the South into the Confederacy. But okay, the point about FDR's 100 days is that he had to basically reestablish the banks. Okay, he had to control big business. He had to provide for an immediate series of initiatives that would create jobs. And he also, in doing that, created the Civilian Conservation Corps.
Right.
Which was crucial because it not only indicated his determination to start providing some kind of jobs and work, but also he was absolutely determined to do something about the deteriorating American environment.
Yeah, the first New Deal was a Green New Deal, if you think about this.
Yeah, actually, you're right. I mean, you had the Dust Bowl in the Midwest and the Plain States, and they planted the CCC itself planted, I think, 3 billion trees in the course of its life in order to, well, not only for the sake of fighting the soil erosion around the country, but also because of that drought in the Plain States, which did involve CCC people. The point was that the American agricultural scene, although the richest in the world, was in serious trouble. And it was in serious trouble because the Great Plains were not all, the soil of the Great Plains was fairly shallow.
Right.
Okay. And basically, as they removed trees, they literally created the conditions for the Dust Bowl to happen in a situation of a drought.
Wind blows.
And then even here in Wisconsin, and we were not part of the Dust Bowl itself, here in Wisconsin, the hillsides of Western Wisconsin, farmers had practiced a kind of agriculture which was utterly inadequate because it really enabled the erosion of the soil. Okay, by failing to do the plantings in the proper order, by not having trees to hold the soil together. So the CCC was part of that. So right from the beginning, FDR made it clear, we're going to create jobs and we're going to address the American environment as much as the American economy. The other thing is that I won't go through the whole first 100 days of the New Deal, but if you look over time, what happened was he raised people's expectations.
Mm-hmm.
That the Depression might come to an end sooner rather than later. And there emerged in the course of there were those who had supported him who in the course of, say, 1934, began to turn on FDR. So those folks included the likes of Father Coughlin,
right,
the priest up in the Detroit area, who began as sort of a populist kind of priest. Later, by the end of the 1930s, had basically become a raging anti-Semitic, pro-fascist voice, and eventually had to be shut down by the Catholic Church itself. Okay, another one who was not at all necessarily that kind of raging voice, but had this plan was Francis Townsend. I think that's Francis' first name, and his idea was basically to create funds to provide people above a certain age with $200 a month as a way of reviving the economy and taking care of the elderly, because the poorest people in America were the elderly, in fact.
right.
So that's the second. And the third is, of course, Huey Long out of Louisiana. And let's be clear, Huey Long is from the northern part of Louisiana, not the southern.
Right.
So actually, it's a little of a distance from where I was living in Louisiana to Long's territory. But Huey Long was
I've driven through there a million times. Yeah.
And he offered the plan, share our wealth. Okay,
yes.
Every man a king. Now, I think it was telling, and people say, well, wasn't Huey Long, great, and wasn't he really a threat to the FDR style Democratic Party? Well, he was indeed. They were all threats, especially if they ever joined together, which was not out of the question. It was very unlikely. I'll go to the end and come back. It's very unlikely. Well, Coughlin couldn't run for president. I think he was born in Canada. And he was a priest. He was no way he was going to do that. Townsend had no political ambitions, apparently, but Huey Long did, and he's governor of California. Well, a U.S. Senate. He was an experienced politician. Let's put it that way. And And he had an amazing capacity to engage people because he spoke to them in terms they could readily understand. And by the way, that's something both he and Roosevelt shared.
Mhm.
The difference is this: Roosevelt was absolutely committed to democracy. Okay?
Right.
However much he may have made some tragic mistakes along the way. Huey Long was clearly interested in redistributing wealth. I don't think there's any question about it. Share Our Wealth was exactly that. And it was a fascinating program that he outlined. The thing is that Louisiana was not a hotbed of democracy itself. Okay,
No, never
the
has.
inequality, the racism, even the treatment of the Cajun population in the southern part of the state, and the divide between the Protestant North and the Catholic South. I mean, it's all these divisions inside Louisiana. Huey Long was not a promoter of democracy. That's the one thing I want to make clear. However, he was clearly a populist who wanted to redistribute wealth. That was going to be his way of challenging the social order and economic order in Louisiana. And so when people say to me, well, what's your take about Huey Long? As my take is, it's an amazing figure and a fascinating figure, but it's so telling that it was every man a king.
Right.
Okay, which is a very un-American expression.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, he didn't say that may have implied a kind of equality, but it also implied a certain disdain for small d democratic politics. And I think that's what distinguishes Huey Long that's one of the reasons that Huey Long and I never became friends. Okay, but I can tell you that he was a bright spot in Louisiana history in many ways, because he really placed on the agenda the question of inequality and his willingness to challenge the oil companies, which he may have made deals with along the way. But a fascinating kind of figure. And when I was in Louisiana, those years, it was tough to get people to think seriously about equality. It was
Right.
pretty evident.
Still lingering segregation around the state. You know, they were still trying to desegregate schools in the 70s.
Oh God, that was of course the time of the growth of basically the white Christian schools.
Right.
Okay. And at first I didn't quite make sense of it, but it was obviously the case that was the way to avoid having your kids in an integrated classroom. And
most of them weren't very good.
They paid teachers poorly. These were not elite schools, many of them.
No.
They paid teachers poorly, but they were so clearly race-based.
Yes, they were. So yeah, it was.
Oh, by the way, there was a guy who wrote a book back in, it was 35, and he called Long and Townsend and Coghlan the Pied Pipers.
Well, he had a lot of opposition from especially the elites of Louisiana. Like, did you ever see the Ken Burns documentary on Huey Long?
I did, but it's pretty vague. I've seen so many Ken Burns documentaries. Baseball, jazz, and FDR and the rest, they almost all meld together in my brain.
Right. Well, anyway, this was one of his earliest, and there were still a lot of older people in Louisiana who personally remembered Huey Long.
Oh, sure.
Would go to the Cajuns, oh, everybody loved Huey Long. Go to the rednecks up north, everybody loves Huey Long. And go to the black people, go to the people in New Orleans, everybody loves Huey Long. And then they had as the representative of the aristocracy, Mrs. Harding Carter, the junior. They run the newspaper, which was anti-Long, and they were regarded as liberals. We're doing it from the liberal. Anyway, she'd get on there. Everybody I knew hated Huey. And then she said she was listening on the radio, and when I heard Huey had been shot, I rushed downstairs to see if Harding was in the house, because I thought he might have done it. And I found him, and then the phone rang, and it was Harding's mother. And I said, oh, yes, he's here. He's all right. But I got to get off the phone so I can call and check on my father. Well, these are the people who are saying Huey is the worst thing that's ever come along. So, most of the memes we've got about Huey were developed by people like that. So you have to take them with a grain of salt.
Yeah, but I should also tell you that FDR head to head versus a Republican was pretty confident he could win in 1936.
Mhm.
The problem was that with these populist movements, and I won't call them right or left necessarily, but these populist movements represented a threat collectively
Right.
to the New Deal. And the reason I say that is that the richest people in America, like the top 10 richest men in America, really wanted to destroy the FDR presidency. But I'm going to tell you something funny about that. They originally were rather sympathetic to FDR in the campaign of 32.
He was one of them.
Because they believed that FDR would save them from suffering higher taxes. And by the way, only rich people paid taxes back in those days.
Right.
So here's, okay, so by way of income tax, I mean. The thing is, they figured that he would save them taxes because if you voted for FDR, you were voting to end prohibition.
Oh, right. So we
And
could
if you
tax
ended
alcohol.
prohibition, you could tax beer and other alcohol. So they supported him essentially, you might say, at that in the early moments. The problem was that he ended prohibition, and in 33, he and the Democrats, and along the way in 35, he radically acted to empower workers that represent, which they despise the thought of organized labor.
Right.
And he also was prepared, and also to pursue the New Deal, because he really didn't like running huge deficits. To pursue the New Deal, he figured we'll tax the rich and business and those. So basically, they organized something called the American Liberty League, and they spent millions to try to destroy the New Deal and FDR. Now, the problem they had is FDR had already won the hearts and minds of working people.
Right.
And the Liberty Leaguers could not rally people at the grassroots level. However, there was real talk that what they could do is they could encourage the development of a third party.
They could
with the
pay
folks,
Huey to
you know,
run.
the Long people and others, okay, so that they would pull votes from the Democratic Party, which might then enable the Republican to win.
Right. The sheriff
course-
party would be a spoiler party.
Yeah, and a party did emerge, but Huey had been shot as a consequence. It was I think a figure from up north, I forget the state, who ended up leading that, wasn't it? I should look back. But anyhow, so the party did form, but it was irrelevant to the election.
Yeah.
Were they aligned with the people that are in Kevin Cruz's book or Cruz's book, the One Nation Under God, the people that were going around to the churches and trying to court the pastors to push, church members to the right?
It
Was
could
the
easily
Liberty
be,
League
but
at
I have
all
to tell you,
aligned with them?
honestly, I have to say, I haven't read Kevin Cruz's book. So,
They were doing a lot of the things that are being done today, because this is
yeah,
before
no, absolutely. In fact,
such-
and I'll also tell you, it was called. They actually held something called I think it was called the Grassroots Convention down south to try to mobilize these forces together. And on every seat in the gathering, there was a cartoon. You know about this cartoon? Okay, it was a little comic. And it was a picture of Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt in front of the White House. And one of them says to the other in one, well, I won't use the N word. You kiss the Negroes, I'll kiss the Jews. We'll stay in the White House as long as we choose. Which was to imply, of course, that, the racism and anti-Semitism.
Sure, yeah.
And the idea was not so much, create whatever you want in the fearful imagination. The point was, of course, to encourage these people to mobilize against FDR and pull the votes from the Republican and pull the votes from the Democratic Party so the Republicans would win. Turned out FDR romped in 1936.
Right.
Overwhelmingly. And look, Southern working people knew who their friend was. I looked through the letters. FDR used to get hundreds of thousands of letters sent to the White House directly to FDR. Okay, they had to hire additional clerks, women clerks is what they hired in those days, just to go through the mail. And they would pick out certain letters and send it up higher and higher. Well, one of the letters was great. It was from a mill worker down in, I think, South Carolina. And it said how much he loved FDR. He said, "You're the first president who realizes that my boss is a son of a bitch."
Well, my two grandfathers both had small farms in Mississippi, but they worked in the week on WPA style.
Oh, yeah.
One was a bricklayer, one was a carpenter, and they'd go off, and my grandmothers and the kids would tend to the farm while they made a little cash, and that's how they got in. I know the Spells, my mother's parents, they were almost socialist to the day they died. They were very democratic. They would never dream of voting for Republican. They produced this generation of diehard Republicans. And how do we get those folks back? Or they're dying off now, but how do we get the modern Southern, the white, poor people that used to vote for Democrats because they knew Democrats would help? I think part of it is message, but also part is what do we offer them?
It's more than message.
Give them the $2,000.
I believe seriously in messaging. I have no reservation in saying that. I mean, I spend all my time going through speeches. I spend my time how do presidents articulate a vision? How do politicians, how do radicals articulate a vision?
Right.
And my hero is actually Thomas Paine of the American Revolution, who literally turned the colonial rebellion into a revolution by writing a pamphlet, Common Sense, and enabling Americans to see themselves more effectively than they were seeing themselves.
And that was one thing Huey and FDR shared in common, was the ability to
But here's the thing, but the message itself is not what will draw people away, especially not after years of having turned away. And why did those people turn away from the Democratic Party? Well, undeniably, in parts of the country, race played a role, undeniably. But I think actually there's something even more powerful. The thing that kept people from coming back to the Democratic Party, working people, is that the Democratic Party turned its back on working people.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So in the 1970s, okay, I mean, I sound like I'm picking on Southern boys, but Jimmy Carter was anti-FDR. His family hated FDR. He pretended
they were cousins to our Harding Carters. They put the Harding Carter III to work. So yeah, they hated Huey from way back.
Yeah, right. So basically Carter pretended to be a liberal when he ran in 76 because he had to win a Democratic nomination. But in 78, when push came to shove, he turned his back on the labor unions, on the consumer movement, and on the environmental movement. And I'm serious. If you read the book, The Fight for the Four Freedoms, I really finish with Carter's treachery, the way in which he turned the Democratic Party really into a paving stone for Ronald Reagan. He deregulated industry, he deregulated finance, he deregulated transportation. He did turn his back on working people. He put all of his political capital into trying to sell Americans and the Congress on returning the Panama Canal to Panama, all well and good, but he put all of his political capital on that and could care less about the average working people of his day. By the way, the term austerity, which is the byword of neoliberalism, it's not Ronald Reagan who used to use it. It was Jimmy Carter who used the word austerity in his speeches of 1978, alongside of expressions like "we need to liberate business." Okay, things like that.
Don't forget Malays.
Oh yeah, well, in the 70s, the Democrats moved to the right. Ted Kennedy, for all of his sins, obviously, made an effort to try to hold on to the Democratic Party, at least to some extent, as a left-leaning party. He failed. And then if you look thereafter, the Democrats became, to some extent, exactly what Jimmy Carter had pioneered, neoliberals.
Bill Clinton
about it. Think about Mondale. Think about Mondale in '84 when he ran against Reagan. Reagan, who had brought on a recession in '82. What did Mondale run on? Remember what he said? He said, he pointed to Reagan and said, "They're not going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you. We're going to raise your taxes." Well, how the hell do you win a presidential election by telling Americans you're going to raise their taxes instead of telling them these are the kinds of things we're going to do with the money we raise?
Yes.
Right.
That's what I keep harping on.
Okay.
That's what I keep harping on. And truth in advertising, the listeners know this. I'm related to the Longs by marriage. So they are some of my in-laws. But
That's why he's not showing his face on this video.
No, but Earl is my hero because he really gave a damn about working people.
Yeah.
But he
right.
Earl did a lot of good things in terms of Bruce and I have talked about this on air. He added Black Louisianans to the voting rolls when nobody in the Deep South was doing that. He added over 100,000 to the voting rolls.
Well,
he got black and white teachers and pay parity too.
Stephen, it's very interesting. If you ask people about ways in which the voter suppression that existed from the late 19th century all the way through to the 1960s, and you ask about that, and immediately they only think of African Americans. And what they don't realize is that in some southern states, far more whites as a raw number, okay, were disfranchised because of poll taxes and literacy requirements.
Right.
And that, well, I made my point having said that. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Absolutely do understand.
And so to kind of to take that out to a kind of its logical conclusion. I mean, people do point out rightly that Earl was a segregationist, but so was LBJ. But LBJ was pushed.
In LBJ's defense, he was not the segregationist that he's often portrayed as. Okay.
So not as extreme or whatever.
Right. In fact, when he was the so-called master of the Senate, what I've read, if you look closely, it's that, look, Southern senators were going to filibuster it. And if a civil rights bill came up there, it had no future. So what he did is he watered them down to enable them to get through. And you could say, well, he watered them down. If he didn't water them down, they would never have gotten through.
Right. Get something through now and we'll get more later.
Yeah. So,
And this is to build on what you said about getting something for your tax dollars. There's a famous speech where Earl says that, and he's from North Louisiana like Bruce and me, so he's a hillbilly. And he says, they talk about in Texas, they've got low taxes, and what it is they have no income tax, but they have high property taxes. But he says in Louisiana, he said you get something for your taxes. You get, they had old age pensions, which were revolutionary for the Deep South.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Charity hospitals too.
I have a question for you guys.
Sure.
There's something that's been, I want to make clear to everyone but I want to do it so I know which county. What are the counties that are the northern counties, the Long territory? Okay.
Parishes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hold on. You know what? As the question formulated in I knew that. I formulated it as parishes, and somehow it came out counties.
Well,
you know why? Because I always forget it's parishes. It's parishes from south to north in Louisiana.
Right.
Yeah, we're the only state that does it right. So I understand your confusion. Everybody else has counties.
Right.
Nobody has
so remind me, what are the northern counties? Tell me the northern counties that are.
So Huey and Earl were from Wynn Parish.
That's in Wynn Parish. Thank you.
And there's Jackson and we're Lincoln and
yeah, we're only 50 miles from Winfield. So
Wynn Parish, as I understand it, you probably know this too, was seriously entertaining seceding from Louisiana in 1861.
Yeah,
supposedly it did. They formed what was called the Free State of Wynn. We were told that it probably was just a police jury action. Did it go anywhere? We can't seem to find out. But I will say this: Louisiana, among the states of the Deep South, was the only one to send. This is really remarkable. Sent over 8,000 whites to fight for the Union. This is not even counting African American Louisianans. So it's really remarkable.
From my time in Louisiana.
And some were from New Orleans, but some were from Wynn Parish. They fought
they
for the
also
Union.
had strong populism there and
a socialist party too.
Socialist newspaper.
Right, I do remember
look it up online.
Well, I haven't thought about that since 1975, probably.
And Lincoln Parish, our parish, was founded by Unionists who were Southerners. They were, I think, from Georgia, but they were people. It was a Reconstruction era parish, but they were put in place and they were pro-union, which was again remarkable for this area.
Yeah,
but the name Lincoln gives it away, and then the one far north is Union Parish, and so they're trying to signal to Washington D.C. that they're loyal people here and not all treasonous.
Secessionists.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, West Virginia, of course, did actually pull out of Virginia. I wonder what you would have called Northwest Louisiana. I wonder what the state would have been called. Western Louisiana,
No.
Northern Louisiana. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe
North
North and
Louisiana.
South Louisiana, because I mean the biggest plantations were not all in the South, but most of them were in the South. I mean, there were
Yeah.
some big ones around Shreveport area, but
Oh, I
and
didn't know
Monroe
that.
too. But yeah,
Right.
but this area was all hill country. The soil was poor. There was no ready access by water because we were kind of landlocked.
Yeah, yeah.
Pine
So it
Hills
never-
with
yeah.
clay, red clay. You can't, it's limited amount of mass farming that you can do there. And
So anyhow, to go back to the Democratic Party story, which we were reviewing. So then if you think about Dukakis, who was
Yeah.
a wonk, I mean, he was a policy wonk guy, a centrist. That's what he was about, okay? I
Right.
think he's moved to the left since then, but he's in retirement, obviously. And then you've got, in 92, you've got Bill Clinton. I mean, Bill Clinton of Arkansas was basically a centrist Democrat.
Mhm.
right.
The Democratic Leadership Council, is that what it was called? That basically
Yeah. DLC.
underwrote and advanced his campaign. And then then it's the same in 76. In 1980, I mean, Al Gore, strangely enough, may well have been the most, don't laugh, in his own way, the most liberal of the Democratic candidates, going other than maybe going back to likes of McGovern or
LBJ. Right. McGovern.
Okay, right. Yeah. And then, of course, you come forward, and John Kerry was an elite liberal. Okay. And then, Barack Obama was another neoliberal,
Right.
ultimately. Okay.
And, the last election, besides Bernie and to some extent Liz Warren, it was 30 wonderful flavors of neoliberal, change. We may be different races, genders, whatever parts of the country, but we're all the same, right? Under the skin, they're all neoliberal.
But not Bernie.
No, not Bernie.
Not Bernie.
And, I like the way he sells his health care. He says, we're going to have free health care at the point of, when you get work done. What about taxes? Yeah, taxes will go up, but you not have a premium to pay.
Right.
You
there'll be
don't
no
have
premiums.
co-payment.
I think you won't have the nightmare of trying to figure out which healthcare plan you're going to buy. You're not going to go through all the paperwork that's involved. I mean, it was amazing how the Democrats just literally, well, they obviously wanted him out, and they did their
Oh
best.
my God, they did something they've never done. Everybody dropped out and threw their support to Joe Biden, and
Yeah.
we're
I also want to say Bernie failed. As long as we've been talking about FDR, Bernie failed himself, I think. Here's why. When he was in those debates, he already had a platform that was literally an echo, a 21st century echo of FDR's New Deal platform.
right.
What he should have done in the debates is literally conjured up the image of FDR and brought him into the room and
I
said,
think I've heard you
"Call
say
yourself
that before. Yeah.
Have I said this to you already?
No,
you
not
call
us. I
yourself-
think you said it to Sam Cedar. Somebody
Yeah, I
said
say this to everybody I can tell, believe me. Okay? And I say, you look at these guys, say, hey, you call yourselves Democrats? And here's FDR. Tell him that we can't afford Medicare, the man who created Social Security. Okay? I mean, that's bullshit. But Bernie didn't do it. Bernie didn't do it.
I'll tell you who's also electrifying was one of his surrogates, and she's been an official up in Ohio. Is that Nina Turner?
Oh yeah, she's running for Congress up in.
She's a real promising young candidate to me. I mean, she's electrifying.
I'm assuming that that's a congressional seat that's open because Marcia Fudge got moved in. She's been nominated for. Is it housing and urban development?
Yeah, it's a cabinet, some sort of cabinet post.
Right,
Yeah.
I'm forgetting. Right, exactly. There are good Democrats around the country. This guy Ro Khanna out of California, I think, is
right.
good.
Yeah.
All Bush out of St. Louis now.
All the energy is with the left right now. AOC, the squad. That's what's bringing people out. They talked about one of the key components. Immediately when the Democrats didn't do as well as they thought in the last election, they started blaming Black Lives Matter. Well, if you look at Democratic voter registration all through the spring after Bernie got out, it was just flat. Nobody's coming out to register to vote for Joe Biden. The minute the George Floyd, protests started, so did the people registering to vote, especially Black people, new Black voters registering to vote all of a sudden. We wouldn't have won without them. And they're wanting to blame them that they didn't do better. Get a message.
Yeah, the best example of ultimately that making huge difference is Stacey Abrams mobilizing her voter organization drive of the last few years. It wasn't her alone. It was a whole variety of groups, and she became in many ways the face of the effort.
Right.
But it was the case that this was really a remarkable change. If you consider that Georgia now has 2 Democratic senators, one is African American and the other is Jewish.
And both Democratic, it's almost impossible. And I think the only reason we finally got it was Joe Biden, desperate to hold this or get the Senate, stole an idea from Donald Trump. We're going to give you $2,000. Right. And as soon as they won, oh, by the way, we didn't really mean it. We're going to give you $1,400.
We'll start backpedaling.
Yeah.
What's funny is when he said 1,400, I know that what he did is he figured, well, they already have 600. We'll just add 1,400 to it, right? But that's not what people heard.
No.
What they heard is, we, the Democrats, will provide you with $2,000. We're not going to do it Donald Trump and the Democrats. No, the Democrats.
And Sam Cedar has been pushing this all week. It's almost a $2 trillion bill. This would add 50 or 60 billion. It's a rounding error in a multi-trillion-dollar bill. It's the money, right. Yeah. But why are we hitting ourselves in the face with a hammer? Roll out the 2,000. You get to see what Democrats are made of the moment they decide we're going to go it alone without Republican input. And then all of the other stuff, that's just Democrats being Democrats. You want them to, study a little about FDR, if not Huey.
Exactly. You've got, look, the first thing you got to not do is lie to people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And don't look like you're weak.
Right.
Okay. You got to, look, if Biden worried about making it work, he should have called out the labor movement. He should have called out the Black Lives Matter movement and said, we need you back out on the street.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Because that's what FDR did. He actually did it that way. He would, if people came in to demand action, he would say, I agree with you. Now make me do it. And what he really meant is, give me the power and the force to do it.
Right.
In case Congress says no.
They've got to be resolute. They need to be resolute or decisive, right?
The problem with Democrats, I think ultimately, we can talk about all the obvious faults of the Democrats, but all of those faults, I think, go back to something really fundamental. I think the Democrats are afraid of their fellow citizens. Mm-hmm. So I think they're afraid to invoke a memory of what Americans are about and what we can do. They don't want people to demand and to be in the streets. They don't want people to protest. They want people to come out, vote for us, and then we'll take care of everything. That was the view that Clinton had, and it was the view ultimately that Obama had. Clinton and Obama talked about hope and change and all that kind of stuff. Problem was, once they were in, it was leave it to us. It happened with Clinton. He ran on He ran on a universal health care idea. And what did he do? He created a healthcare healthcare commission with Hillary in charge that was run for a full year in secret. He didn't call out Americans to demand action. That's first. Then you get to Obama, who told all of these young people, like my students and your students, yes, we can.
Right.
And then as soon as he's in office, when he's going to pursue the question of national health care of some sort, he ends up negotiating with 2 senators from Maine instead of saying to Americans, come on, turn out in the public square. And because he didn't ask them to turn out in the public square, the Tea Party did turn out in the public
square. Right. It's all a bait and switch of a sort.
he was the community organizer, but the moment he got elected, he's been the community disorganizer. He took that massive movement he put together to
And
get into
dismantled it.
office, dismantled it, told him to go home. He crushed Occupy Wall Street.
He prosecuted whistleblowers too, and
Yes, and he
Black
ignored,
Lives Matter. He crushed them. We saw
and he did nothing.
arrowheads in the street.
In spite of his promise to align himself with labor, when we occupied the state capitol to try to save our collective bargaining rights as public employees, he didn't come to the state. Michelle didn't come to the state. His Secretary of Labor didn't come to the state. They literally turned their backs on Wisconsin workers. So, they really do not trust their fellow citizens. But by the way, in favor of one thing in favor of Obama before I completely leave it. Recently, Obama did a podcast with some people, I think, who had been in his administration. And he was sitting in a room with books behind him. I should show you the picture. And on the shelf is that bind,
All right.
Which my editor noticed one time watching the video. So there's that. My book is on his shelf, but I don't think he read it.
There was a famous Winston Churchill, he made a lot of quips, but he was the target of a lot also. And he churned out book after book. And he got a thank you note from somebody. Dear Winston, thank you for the book I received from you. I put it on the shelf next to your others.
I'll tell you what, I would be happy if he got all my others and lined them up on his shelf.
Just put them on your shelf, man.
What I really would have liked him to do is to be out in public holding the book.
Right.
So people could see it, right? Oh, well.
But he's had years of experience ignoring radical voices, because he had Reverend White write that, you think, oh my goodness, there's some hope for this guy if that's his pastor. And then where'd that go? Where's that Obama,
Yeah, I was not you guys are Baptists who trained in divinity, and you probably got excited by that language of Reverend Wright. I was not a Reverend Wright fan. I can't endorse anybody who says, what was it, damn America? Something like that.
God,
Yeah.
damn America, yeah.
I can't subscribe to that. Whether it's a left voice or a right voice, I won't subscribe to that.
Well, it certainly gives if you listen to the whole thing, he's talking about, America.
I understand what it was about.
It's just his rhetoric was not effective. And that's kind of part of what we're talking about today is, the rhetoric of FDR, the rhetoric of Huey Long and Earl Long, and how were they able to reach and it wasn't just rhetoric, as you say, they had programs to back the rhetoric.
Right.
They were setting up charity hospital chains all over the state, and it wasn't exactly.
I was born in one. I was born in the one in Shreveport, thanks to Earl Long.
It wasn't exactly Medicare for all, but if you were poor, you had a place to go. And after Katrina, General Honore came into New Orleans, and one of the early things he did, he had all of his this charity hospital, this great, WPA project, beautiful building, and but it was ruined, and they went through and fixed it up. Power's on, air conditioning, water's going, the beds are made, and he got word from Baton Rouge, oh, never mind, we don't want to reopen that up. Well, 15 years later, New Orleans is the #1 hotspot in the country for COVID. I wonder what the connection is there. You don't have medical care. You're going to get sick. And we've had a charity hospital in Louisiana for almost 300 years until they closed it down. It was opened in the very early days of the French colony. The sailor died and he had some money and he left it to set up a charity hospital. It wasn't Republicans that shut it down. It was Kathleen Blanco, a Democrat, who shut that hospital down. And we're wondering, well, why aren't people voting for us? Well, I know why they aren't voting for us.
Think about it this way. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has been a complete disaster in leading the campaign in California to fight the pandemic.
Oh my God, they've got a recall campaign against him.
Yep, that's right. And then in New York State, you've got Cuomo, who was cutting the number of hospital beds
Right.
in New York prior to the pandemic. And
The
even
Democratic Trump, as
pandemic.
his nickname goes.
And he's lying about the number of deaths in the nursing homes.
It's awful. So we got to get better Democrats, and then I think we'll, you know,
We have to get better Democrats, and I know some who I think I have hope in the future in. But it's also the case it's not just we have to get better Democrats. We have to be better.
Yeah.
Progressive citizens.
Right. Because as Democratic voters, we are actually responsible for putting Joe Biden in the White House when we could have had a Bernie.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I want to, by the way, since I said the critical stuff about Bernie, that's one thing I do want to say really extremely in favor of Bernie. Extremely. I realize as I watched the first 2016 primaries between Bernie and Hillary, and then this time around, what distinguished Bernie, not just in substance, but in purpose from all the others, was he was the candidate who not only said he would fight for us, he wanted to encourage the fight in us.
Yes.
There's Hillary, and now this time around, the likes of Biden and the others, they were going to fight for us, but they didn't say, we want you to join us in this fight. That's part of that idea. They just don't trust their fellow citizens.
No, they don't want an activist citizenry. And we see why from a month ago when the MAGA chuds tried to eat people's faces off in the Capitol building. You know, if you unleash this, where will it go? And
sowing the wind and reaping the
idea is
whirlwind.
not to encourage people to fight as in that fashion.
But you've got to get out of the street. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Or at least you've got to figure out how to make your voices heard. In assembly, it doesn't always have to be in the street. It can be in other assemblies.
like Stacey Abrams and all the voting, organizers in Georgia. They weren't just marching in the street. They were getting people through all the hoops that the Republicans have been setting up.
Well, look, people have got to join labor unions.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party will always remain basically possessed by neoliberalism or the ghost of neoliberalism without the force of an active, powerful labor movement. The labor movement is the one movement that brings people together, whether they're male or female or transgender, whether they're black or white or brown. That's the place where it's got to happen.
Well, and Joe Biden has an opportunity to strengthen the labor movement. I have a feeling he's going to stab him in the back, just based on who he is.
Based on the events of this past few days, yeah.
And who he's always been. I was never really optimistic about him relieving the student debt because he loves people being in debt. Debt is a sacred thing. It must be paid for forever. Unless you're rich.
He put it that way because he's from Delaware.
Yeah.
Right.
Companies are located, and he defended credit cards sending everybody into debt, right?
And he wants people in debt, and he helped rewrite the bankruptcy law to make it harder to get out of debt, including you can't get rid of student loans. Although he didn't touch people.
I was starting to feel optimistic. And I don't even like to use words optimism and pessimism. I don't even like that. But I was starting to believe there was good reason to be hopeful. I prefer that.
Yeah.
A week later, given the decisions I've seen the last few days, really worrisome. I worry because if they don't make a significant difference in people's lives, if they don't work in some way to redistribute power and wealth, they're going to lose the House in 2022. They may hold the Senate, oddly enough, they may hold the Senate in 2022, but they'll lose the House in 2022. And the House really is where the money comes from.
And then they'll lose the presidency in 4 years.
That's
because after 4 years of disappointment, and you aren't going to get anything good for America done with a Republican House or Senate.
Yeah, I like that purple and gold drinking thing.
That's my LSU cup, if I can get it to show up.
Right? Yeah.
I would get a Louisiana Tech one, but they don't make them. You have to be a school of a certain size to get a big cup like that.
Oh, okay.
economy of scale.
I have a Louisiana blanket downstairs, so on these very cold days at night, rather than turn the heat up, we just throw the blanket over ourselves.
Yes, and we can't afford a library fix up at LSU, but we got how much money did they spend on the swimming pool? They've got an LSU shaped swimming pool that is like an endless river and costs millions and millions of dollars. Meanwhile, the water is leaking in on Middleton Library.
Geez, they should have just channeled the Mississippi to come in and go out again.
That's it. We could do it.
What do you think about these various faith movements that are mobilizing to push more progressive type policies, and what they're basing this on is all of this being a moral imperative as well as a small d democratic imperative, but a moral imperative?
Give me an example of what you mean.
I have been on the board, and our chapter here in Louisiana seems to have died with the modern poor people's campaign.
Oh yeah, so Reverend Barber's movement.
Yeah,
started out as Moral Monday.
He and I actually, the weirdest coincidence, he did his doctorate where the same school where my first New Testament professor had done his master's or doctorate up at Drew, up in New Jersey at the Drew Seminary.
I know Drew University. I'm from New Jersey originally, so
yeah. So, but yeah, he's he's been a real champion. He and Dr. Theo Harris have been real champions in that movement.
Yeah, that's a Methodist seminary, right?
I think so. It's either Methodist or Presbyterian. I think it's Methodist. Yeah,
I think it's Methodist. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Methodist. The Presbyterian seminary is at Princeton.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So, the poor people, the Moral Monday movement was one of several progressive efforts, sort of 2000 and, sort of in the wake of Occupy. That's the best way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the Moral Monday, it was the Fight for 15, it was the Keystone Pipeline campaign. I'm forgetting the others right off the top of my head, but there was a real dynamism on the left for that period. The point was it never really coalesced. It never really came together effectively. Mm-hmm. And my politics are basically bound up with labor, but it strikes me that anyone who's a person of faith with any sense of solidarity is surely going to want to align themselves with the likes of Reverend Barber. And in fact, funny enough, just today he made for a $15 minimum wage, and he presented it as a call for racial justice, basically. Mm-hmm. He wasn't calling for reparations. He was calling for the $50 minimum wage, because we know that the majority of folks who are suffering the minimum wage are probably people of color.
Right.
And it made sense. It wasn't a term I would have used readily, but yeah, $50 minimum wage it's a question of racial justice and class justice at the same time. At the least, at a minimum, you might say. Right.
Yeah, our chapter here seems to have died, and one of the problems is something that we addressed a few minutes ago. But apart from the fact that the capital is so far from North Louisiana, just from Ruston, it's over 200 miles. From Shreveport, it's 250, 260 miles. It's a long way. Yeah. But on top of that, you've got all these different cultures that have been at each other's throats for centuries, literally, in this state.
Yeah,
and so it really complicates things.
That's something of a national problem as well, and it always has been. Multiculturalism sounds great, but more often, the diversity of America, it takes a lot to bring it together. It really does, and
well, in clear messaging,
he tells
helped with Huey, because he was able to get all of the people under a certain he was able to get people to see their economic self-interest in uniting with people from other groups, and he was able to do that across the state, which nobody really had done before, and not that often since.
I guess it was a real threat.
Yeah, it didn't give you real programs. He had real benefits. I'm going to put, do you know that
roads had stronger small d democratic instincts? I think it would have been.
Yeah, and I would like to see how the share the wealth groups would have developed had there been time, because that was an organizing. You're going to have a local club. we're going to get together and have the Share the Wealth Club. And he had a newspaper, what was the Louisiana Progress?
Louisiana Progress, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think that wasn't that the name of it.
Yeah, and then he changed the name to the National Progress when he got a little bigger. So there were signs, but yeah, but like the roads. Do you know how the story about how he got roads built in Louisiana? So
Yeah, this is familiar. Tell me.
he came into power. He had enough, and he didn't have the Senate and the House in his pocket yet. He couldn't get any more money than had already been budgeted, and he had 60 miles of road budgeted for the whole year. So where are you going to put 60 miles of road? And I always do this with my classes, and they always say Baton Rouge to New Orleans because it's 60 miles.
Yeah.
Have a nice road. Well, that's what a smart politician would do. A genius politician put a couple of miles of road out of Monroe, a couple of miles at the edge of Shreveport, a couple of miles at the edge of Winfield. They actually brought it into the movie, All the King's Men with Sean Penn. And he, they had that moment in his flunky Tiny said, "Why you want to do that, boss? People want the roads finished." And Sean Penn said, "You just answered your own question, Tiny, because people got a taste for roads everywhere. I'm going to give everybody a little."
When I lived in Ecuador as a exchange student, I was always amazed. I would run into those kinds of roads where like it would come out of a town and just go for a couple miles. And I'd say to Bill, "What's this all about?" Thinking maybe, just maybe that was a plan on a grander scale. Nope, this was a place that a president of Ecuador had lived in for a while, and they started to build the road, but then he was overthrown in a military takeover, so they stopped the road.
My whole youth, we would go back and forth from Ruston to Collins, Mississippi. And when we moved to Ruston in '64, I think we had interstate from Ruston to Monroe, and then it was Highway 80, just, bumper to bumper through these little towns over a horrible Mississippi River bridge that goes back to the Depression. And every year they'd get a few miles more built. And finally, we had all 4-lane highways from Ruston to Collins, and then all paved roads from Collins to my grandmother's house. And that was a big day.
That's a big, it is, yeah.
Yeah, but that was the New Deal. This was New Deal still unfolding in the 60s and 70s. Let's get these roads paved.
Yeah. Well, in fact, the interstate highway system, which I know there are downsides to it, but the interstate highway system was actually a plan of the later Roosevelt years that was shelved and that Eisenhower brought back and basically.
Yeah,
so this actually went back to Roosevelt himself. In other words, the idea.
Yeah, the idea of an interstate highway had gone back to Roosevelt's years. Not exactly in the New Deal years. I think it actually came up during the World War II years as a plan.
Well, for the same reason.
After the war, there would be this further New Deal continuing.
For the same reason Ike wanted it, you could get stuff around quicker if you had the infrastructure built. We can build tanks in Iowa. How are we going to get them to the sea so we can put them on a ship?
Funny to say that. The height of the overpasses on the interstate highways apparently was determined by what it would take to move an ICBM.
Oh my gosh!
Underneath.
Of course they were. You wouldn't want to blow up your bomb going under a bridge.
Yeah, well, I read that about 15 years ago, I remember. Yeah.
How do we make the small d democratic or just in a broader sense, the progressive vision accessible, do you think, to common people? People that they feel as though they've been left behind, they've been ignored, they've been scorned or whatever. I mean, how do we make that come to life for them, you think?
Well, I get that asked all the time. And the first thing is, of course, that the major media is not going to encourage a good critical small d democratic memory. They're just not. Okay? The Democratic Party politicians won't do it. So it's odd as it is, and I'm not trying to patronize you, but I think podcasters around the country, there ought to be like a movement of podcasters or something like that. okay, who can take to YouTube or just audio on the podcast basis, and sort of just make it their point of cultivating this kind of historical memory that, you know, the way things are is not the way they have to be. There have been alternatives in the past. How did that happen? Not simply because FDR was a. I did a YouTube show a week and a half, 2 weeks ago with Jacobin, the socialist magazine.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the fifth one I've done with a young guy, 24-year-old, really, really bright guy, Cale Brooks. And he said to me, we had done 4, and he said, what do you think we ought to do next? And I said, well, you know, I've got this idea in my head that I should turn into a book on what makes a good president, what makes a great president, how do you make a great president? And the reason it's a bad title really for the idea, because if you actually look for all of their sins, I don't want to go over American history and the sins of these leaders, but Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and especially in the case of Lincoln and FDR, what really does make them great is that they were themselves determined to accomplish certain kinds of radical and progressive advances. They were. But what enabled them to do it isn't only because they were determined, it's that American working people, whether they were slaves leaving their plantations and making their way to the Union lines, Northern farmers and laborers who, having joined up in the Union Army and witnessing what slavery was like firsthand, or in the case of FDR, workers demanding, organizing unions that Roosevelt himself, you know, helped to empower, they pushed him, FDR, and they pushed Lincoln to do what they wanted to do themselves, but didn't have it in their power to do just yet. So they.
So here's a title for you for your book: Shared Vision.
Oh no, that sounds too much like Share the Wealth.
Or share. How about share our vision, maybe?
Well, I think we need to dust off share our wealth, because, you know, workers create the wealth and then we don't get a part of it.
Well, yeah. Well, now you're talking like a real socialist.
Right? Yeah. Well, you know, Stephen and I got into this. We were going to do a nice little podcast about the regions of Louisiana and Longfellow's Evangeline. And
oh, sure.
Next thing you know, we're doing these. I mean, we're right there with Good Morning Comrade is the most left-wing podcasts in Louisiana.
You know my friends at Good Morning. You know Jeff?
Oh yes, I see Jeff at the grocery store. You know, like we bump into each other. And
what?
See, we were the.
I've been living in New Orleans while the COVID's going with family
during the pandemic.
Oh, okay. Because
so I'm holding down the fort up here, and he's down in New Orleans.
Although I'm headed back.
I've done Good Morning Comrade maybe 3 or more times. I can't remember. And we stay in touch. I did one just a couple of weeks ago, as a matter of fact.
He's awesome. He's been on our podcast. We've been on his. You know, we swap back and forth. But for most of the time we've been the only lefty podcast in the state. You know.
Well, the region. I mean, I tell people this sort of not just as a statement of fact, but as a source of pride. We're the only lefty podcast in North Louisiana, South Arkansas, Northeast Texas, or South Oklahoma. We're it.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah, we're it.
As far as we know,
this whole 4-state area.
We try to keep it out, but Rush is popular. You know what, Rush Limbaugh? I think it's real popular.
Oh, jeez. Leave me alone there. Okay.
I'd rather drink strychnine than listen to him.
Well, back in the early 90s, I used to listen, and I actually read his books. So I had to figure out what this was about. And oh God, the only thing worse was Glenn Beck.
Oh my God. But anyway, we kind of backed into the progressive political angle just because nobody else was doing it. And so
that's great. It's really good. I wish this could, that you should multiply yourself somehow.
Well, and we had the seminary training to do the moral. We're doing a lot of what we do is moral critique, which makes us more like Dr. Barber and Dr. Theo Harris.
Yeah, I think that's great. Absolutely.
And also, look, we can rhyme.
I'm going to give you a name. I'm going to mention a name to you. I want you to remember this name. Okay. Is a young guy. He's like 41 years old. He grew up in a poor. His mother was a single mother. It was him and his brother. Their house got foreclosed along the way, but he was really smart. Graduated valedictorian of his high school in LA, and he went to Harvard. And then he spent 10 years making a lot of money with these Wall Street types. And his brother said to him one day, you're your 20-year-old self would not like your 30-year-old self.
Hmm.
So he left New York, left the East Coast, went back to LA. He was still going to invest money, but he launched various movement efforts, workinghero.org, and things like that, to lobby on behalf of the working poor. And his name is Joe Sandberg, Sandberg. And he's been on Twitter. He's been calling for some time for a $22.75, to raise the minimum wage, not to 15, but up into the 20s.
Right.
I think he'll be running for major political office in the next year or so. I mean, I don't know if it'll be mayor of LA yet or governor of California. I would think more likely governor of California. And I'm in regular contact with him. I'm very impressed. And the reason I bring him up is that he's in many ways, he's very moral. The moral imperative is definitely motivating him.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, just today I sent him Reverend Barber's tweet about the $15 minimum wage, and I love him. I love him was Joe's response. So, I mean, I can see a guy like him who also has, Martin Luther King and Reverend Barber are these inspirations to him, but also very much, committed basically to class questions of inequality and poverty at the, in a political fashion, an economic fashion. So I have a feeling there are folks like him who will emerge. And for us, our task is to cultivate that kind of spirit so that we're all ready for the likes of such figures who want to run for office, that we can help propel them into office and then challenge them when they're there to live up to this kind of, stuff. So,
what kind of changed things for me and Stephen the day after Trump's inauguration? I went to my first ever protest. Like, I've been moving. In 1980, I voted for Ronald Reagan, and over the years, I've just been, moving further and further left. And I'm going to have to get a Joseph Stalin picture for my wall if I go any further. But
then I'll never talk to you. If you do that, I won't talk to you ever again. ever again, never.
But anyway, well, Uncle Joe. We went to a protest in Shreveport that had at least, what you think, Stephen, 1,500 people.
Yeah, they printed flyers for like 400 or 500 people. So we know a woman who helped organize it, and she's been on the show about 3 times now. And she said that they had between 12 and 1,500 people, get this, from 3 states we know of. They came from Northwest Louisiana, they came from Southwest Arkansas and Northeast Texas, possibly South Oklahoma. Because keep in mind, the Shreveport TV market goes into South Oklahoma.
No kidding.
Up around Idabel, yeah. So yeah, it was pretty phenomenal to see that many people from these 3 states, possibly 4, in a very red area of the country going to protest.
But it was the first time Stephen and I felt like we weren't the only 2, or maybe a few tech professors, but there was actually we got a majority by any means. We don't get our people elected, but we're at least in there swinging. And if you aren't running somebody, they can't win. You never know what's going to happen.
Look, whether it goes the right way or the wrong way, the fact is that all of these popular initiatives, such as your own and Jeff's down there. I mean, I know podcasters. Look, about a month ago, a 19-year-old first-year student at Bemidji State University in Minnesota contacted me. He was launching a podcast.
Oh, wow.
And I did 2 of them. One was on, I don't know, radicalism, and the other one I think was on FDR. And he wants to do another one on Thomas Paine. Now, people say, you're going to do this with these kids? And I said, yeah, that's the whole idea. We got to, we really got to cultivate these things. So
this is democratic technology. Most people have all the technology they need to host a podcast. If you've got a smartphone, which most people scrape together the money to get a smartphone.
Yeah, sure.
Now, we're recording on a computer, but 90% of our podcasts we record on the cell phone, and just tape a call, and, I have to edit it on my computer. So I need a computer, but most people have if you have the basic technology, and internet connection. So there is a bit amount of privilege with that, but a lot of people have that, and it's a lot cheaper
if
than.
19-year-olds in college, if 19-year-old working class kid in college can do it,
Yeah, you can figure out a way.
This is much more affordable and accessible than the old shortwave radios were in the 40s and 50s.
Actually,
much more so.
It's funny. Did I show you last time?
It's a lot cheaper than a TV station or a radio
My former
station.
student. Did I show you this last time?
No. Oh
No.
my God.
Plug it in. I didn't plug it in. I meant to plug it in. A few of my former students, like who graduated maybe 5 or 6 years ago, one day they said, you're doing a lot of these shows.
You need a good.
We really ought to
microphone.
get you. We need to get you a serious microphone.
Well, that looks like an LSU microphone with the color. Do you remember Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Where they said, "Can you sing into my can?" And that kind of looks like that.
Yeah. So I said to them, no, I can't let you do that. You guys use whatever money you've got for your own lives. And they said, it's too late. It's already ordered. And then an hour later, I get a message from Best Buy, that chain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's already sitting on my front steps, the microphone.
Oh my gosh.
So I meant to use it today. I mean, I use it 50% of the time. I'm sorry I didn't plug it in.
Can you tell a difference? Like I have a microphone.
Want to find out? Watch. Let's see what happens. Let's hope I don't lose you guys.
Right. If this thing blows up.
Can you still hear me or not?
Yeah, and you sound about the same.
I do. Okay. I tell people my computer's actually pretty good. So
no, there is a difference now.
there is a difference.
Woke up your audio.
Yeah,
okay.
I probably need a better.
Oh, you better destroy what we did for the last hour and a quarter. We'll start all over again.
Yeah, right.
You mentioned using the technology. I mean, it's interesting. One of my Harvard professors was a media guy from WGBH, and I think I mentioned him last week.
Oh yeah.
Hubert, my professor, predicted this back in the mid to late 80s when I studied with him, which was that as this, and he was talking about cable TV, but he says as economies of scale become more prevalent, you're going to see more right wingers getting on cable TV. And of course, now they're going to Roku, they're going to these various other outlets like this, but they're doing their own podcasts. So again, why don't lefties do podcasts? You see?
Yeah, and look, as I said, there are lots of these popping up, and I remember what I did about a year ago. I did one with a person whose show I do a lot, Nomiki Konst. I don't know
I've heard of her.
I love her.
Yeah, Nomiki. Key is the accent. Okay, Nomiki.
I've been listening to Sam, and he always gets it. Half the time it's wrong.
Yeah, he can never get it right. I can
never get it right.
So I do her show like once every fourth week. I think it's once every fourth week. And I said to her the very first time I think we did a show, which was back, maybe last April, March. I said to her, there's so many podcasts that have emerged. Not all of them are of equal quality, or are they going to operate on the same scale? But it seems a shame there isn't more, as I said before, a movement, some kind of, some way that people can sort of cultivate ideas that can be heard and admittedly.
That was the idea behind Netroots when it started.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. That's it. Yeah. By the way, I need to get going in just a moment. Okay.
Well,
we barely missed meeting Sam. He came to New Orleans a few years ago, and it was after the fact. Bruce and I missed it.
Wow.
And it was a really sad kind of event for us because we didn't get to chat with him.
Well, I started listening to podcasts exactly 10 years ago this month, January 2011. So I could listen to Mark Maron because I'd heard him, he was the big guy and he had been on TV. And I said, what's this podcasting thing I've been hearing about? And so I almost immediately found Sam Cedar because they're associated, loosely. They used to work together, and the Majority Report and the Young Turks. But I think there are a lot more left-wing podcasts now than there were at the time. Of course, they're more of every kind of podcast, but
right, of course, that's right.
But there are a lot that have sprung up and kind of are still loosely associated. Like,
were you guys were either of you fans of my dear departed friend Michael Brooks?
Oh my God, it was.
I called into the show and got to chat with both of them. Yeah, and he was so friendly. I mean, I really, really appreciated him. He and Sam speaking.
Yeah, Michael and I were very close, and so I was on the phone. I had a Zoom meeting with his sister every few weeks she checks
Yeah,
in.
yeah.
And she's got a Michael Brooks Legacy podcast that she's been doing.
Yes, I've been
And
listening to it.
I said to her, you know what, it'd be interesting if there are a lot of podcasters, young and old, around the country who really were, and I don't, you guys weren't, you go back further, but who were influenced by Michael, like these young podcasters who call me and say, can we do something? It's often the case they knew me from Michael's show.
Right.
And I said, you ought to do a show one night if you get like 3, 4, 5 of the 20-year-old set of podcasters,
Right.
and see what they would have to say about how Michael inspired them and to what extent Michael answered things that they needed in their.
I remember
to
when
hear.
he came on Majority Report, and he has been influential in my leftward drift the last few years. You know that because I was perfectly happy with the, you know, they call themselves the Pussy Hats, you know, 4 years ago.
Sure.
With
Right.
I mean, it was great to see people banding together, even in North Louisiana, to oppose Trump. But when you start looking at the policies that the run-of-the-mill Democrat supports, it's not going to meet the needs of our nation or our world or our climate, you know. And
I feel so guilty. I really do need to get going.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah, we really appreciate.
No, thank you. First of all,
I
I want to thank you because I get to talk about Louisiana, which I haven't done in a long time. Okay? Second of all, it's very reassuring to know not only Jeff in the southern part of the state, but you guys in the northern part of the state are promoting the good cause. Okay?
Can you show us your books one more time, so our folks will
please do.
Okay, so first of all, that book that the book that I showed you just the binding of, which is my love letter to America, is Thomas Paine and the Promise of America.
Okay.
Okay. And then the book that really is my study of FDR and the Greatest Generation is this one. Whoops.
There we go.
Fight for the Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great.
Oh, yeah, that was centered perfectly.
Okay, and then 2 more. Then this one came out this past year, FDR and Democracy.
Yeah.
It's a great photo of him on the cover.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. This is not the one I was planning on, and the publisher came on this one. So
they found it.
They chose the color on the cover, which was great. And then last but not least, I would like people, in case they don't have, this is the lowest price because it's a slim paperback.
Take hold of our history.
Make America Radical Again.
Oh, I like that. Yes.
Yeah, these are my speeches and essays. No academic stuff in here. Speeches and essays of the past 10, 12 years.
Can I tell you just about 1 minute story about when
sure.
FDR came?
What I'm looking at is if we get to 3:30 and I'm not off, that's when I'm in trouble.
Okay. Oh, this only take a minute. So FDR came to New Orleans, and I think it was Antoine's he went to, where they make oysters, Rockefeller.
Oh, yeah.
They had this real New Orleanian mayor in the middle of the meal as FDR was eating his oysters, Rockefeller. The New Orleans mayor leaned over to him and said, "How you like them oysters?" FDR in Louisiana.
I love oysters myself.
Oh man, I just had some this week. We went down. You know, they're closing the French Quarter for Mardi Gras. Which seems abominable, but I recognize the name. But it's just anyway. I took my son down there to eat some oysters before they shut it down. So,
well, you're in a part of the state where you don't eat oysters, right?
Yeah.
They're more common nowadays than they were.
Yeah, North Louisiana, you're right. There's
only one restaurant here in this state of Wisconsin that I would trust the oysters because they have to get flown in, to be edible.
There's a restaurant in Monroe. Is it the Mohawk?
Yeah, in Louisville. Yeah.
And they have the old timey waiters and bow ties and.
Oh yeah, sure, right.
They shuck the oysters right there. So
nice, very
that's the only place in North Louisiana to get them. So.
Yeah, geez. Okay, I gotta go.
It's been so nice meeting you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We want to bring you back at some point.
Yeah, sure. We could happily. Don't hesitate to contact me. Happy to talk to you guys.
That's right. Well, you take care. Thanks.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Take care of that state of Louisiana for me.
We will try.
We will.
Okay.